Good evening. Welcome to AlumniTALK. Please note, if you'd like to participate in the Q&A during tonight's discussion, please enter your question, including your name and graduating year, into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Your entry will only be visible to the facilitator. If your question is selected, we will ask your question on your behalf. Please submit questions at any time throughout the presentation. And now, please welcome Kenyatta Monroe Sinkler.
Good evening and welcome to Reunion 2021. Tonight you're in for a treat with a special edition of AlumniTALK, a long time coming, Toni Morrison and the evolution of Black studies at Columbia. AlumniTALK is a virtual speaker series featuring prominent alumni who share their knowledge, insights, and wisdom with the college alumni community on important and critical subject matters. I am Kenyatta Monroe Sinkler, Columbia College class of 1991 and a co-chair of the class of the 1991 Reunion Committee. During this pandemic, the Columbia College Alumni Association, a dynamic community of 52,000 college alumni, has continued to create meaningful opportunities that connect and empower alumni who positively impact the college, the university, and the world. On behalf of the college alumni community, I want to welcome you to an evening focused on race in America. We are all experiencing a painful moment in our history as our society confronts the ugly realities of anti-Black racism. The college began the experiment that became the core curriculum in 1919 to address the insistent problems of the present, and the college alumni believe that the core stands at the ready to help college students investigate and critically assess the issues that still face our society today. Before we get started, please note, if you would like to participate in the Q&A during tonight's discussion, please enter your question, including your graduating year, into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Your entry will only be visible to the facilitator. If your question is selected, we will ask your question on your behalf. Please submit questions at any time throughout the presentation. For optimal viewing, please enter full screen mode. And now about our speakers tonight. Wanda Marie Holland Greene, Columbia College class of 1989, trustee, and also class of Teachers College class of 1991 and 2021. Wanda Holland Greene is the head of school at the Hamlin School in San Francisco, a mission-driven institution dedicated to best practices and innovation in the education of girls and young women. She is nationally recognized as an experienced leader in education with a powerful voice and presence, and she has focused careful attention on academic and ethical excellence, gender equity, performance evaluation, diversity and inclusion, health and wellness, and global citizenship. Ms. Holland Greene is the vice chair of the Columbia University Board of Trustees, as well as a 2020 recipient of the Columbia College John Jay Award for Alumni of Distinction. Professor Jasmine Griffin is the William B. Ransford Professor of English and Comparative Literature and African American Studies at Columbia University and the chair of its African American and African Diaspora Studies Department. She also serves as program director for the Schomburg Center's Scholar and Residence Program. Professor Griffin received her BA from Harvard, where she majored in American history and literature, and her PhD in American Studies from Yale. Her major fields of interest are African and African American literature, music, and history. She has published widely on issues of race and gender, feminism, and cultural politics. Her activism has centered on issues of education, poverty, gender equity, especially as they impact women and children, She currently sits on the board of the Brotherhood Sister Soul, an organization that provides comprehensive, holistic, and long-term support services to youth in Central Harlem. A big welcome to our distinguished speakers, and a very special welcome to Milestone Year alumni and all alumni here tonight.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Kenyatta. It would be bizarre for me not to acknowledge our very close friendship. Kenyatta and I met in class at Columbia in the 80s. And it is just such a pleasure to have you as a part of this night. In fact, the inspiration for it. I had said more than once to Kenyatta that when you ask an educator, whether it's Farah or me, to do something in the month of May, we have to love you a whole lot to say yes. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being here with us. And we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you so much. Just good evening and good afternoon to everyone in our alumni community. I am on a roll when it comes to confessions. So here's another one. I am a big fan and a very blessed and humbled friend of Professor Farah Jasmine Griffin. And I have been so lucky to pinch myself. And back when we could actually sit close to each other without masks, we have had time together and just sitting, talking about the creation of the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. I've watched her walk down the steps of Low Library, holding the mace and really getting our commencement exercises off. I think that may have been the last one we had in person, in fact, in 2019. And so there's just love that truly reaches across the miles as I sit here in San Francisco. And I wish Farah were here on the West Coast right now, but she's not. We're in 2 different time zones, but we are connected heart to heart. So welcome, 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 Professor Griffin.
Thank you so much. And it's absolutely mutual. And so I can feel the love, through the internet.
Good, I love it, I love it. I always say Zoom is not an excuse for boredom or a lack of engagement and connection. So we hope that our participants who are listening, we hope that you will feel like you're interacting. Farah and I love African-American music and literature and gathering, and you have to be in the spirit of the culture tonight. That's why we're all here. So if you want to say amen and hallelujah in the chat, we'll feel perfectly happy with that, as well as you certainly adding your questions to the Q&A as we go forward. And with that, I would just love to begin this dialogue, Farah, by going back in time. It would be disrespectful to begin a conversation about the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, or even talking about the core curriculum without going back to honor, acknowledge, and discuss some of the people who really put the seed in the soil, because we know that we planted seed in the soil that was already fertile ground, and that's why we're able to bloom and blossom today. So if you would, Farah, could you go back in time and give us some sense of the soil and the roots of the current department, either going back to 1993 with the creation of the Institute for African American Research, or the Institute for Research in African American Studies, to get the acronym exactly right, or even before that, like where are our roots, our Columbia roots, when it comes to looking at Black culture, history, and really the whole Black experience, if you will.
Right. So I think you're absolutely right that we have to go back before we can think about where we are. And we can go far, far back with people like Franz Boas, who began to teach about race and culture. But I think for me, a starting point is often with the students who were here in 1968 and the demands that they made. And these are student activists and some students who weren't activists, but as a result of that, there's a kind of curriculum that begins to emerge, and people who come and join the faculty like Charles Hamilton. So we get people like that. But in 1993 is when we actually get the institutionalization of African American studies, Black studies at Columbia, when Professor Manning Marable comes and founds the Institute for Research in African American Studies. And in that context, we'd had people could take classes, people like Marcellus Blount helped to create a major, but it could all be housed in this institute that Manning, who was a very brilliant and dynamic leader, helped to found and give shape to. And the institute first had majors, undergraduate majors and concentrators, and then later on had a master's program, and began to hire people who were jointly appointed. And I came under Manning's leadership. So it's the institute that for years, where students came to take classes and where we did programming, and we had our relationships with Harlem from '93 until we get the formal department of African American Studies just recently. The Institute still exists as the public-facing face of Black Studies at Columbia, and the department is the academic unit that confers degrees and where faculty are housed.
I love it. So we did not replace the Institute with the department, and I think that's important.
No, they are very important. There's a partnership relationship and a kind of organic relationship between the Institute and the department.
I love that. And, one of the things that I often think about is, what is the one sentence that describes a group of people or an institute or a university even? And that sentence for the Institute is, it's an intellectual community that bridges scholarship, teaching, and public life. So there won't be a test, alumni, at the end of this talk, but it's important that if someone says to you, well, what's the Institute for Research in African American Studies, and do we need a department, or is it different, or did it replace? Your resounding answer is no, we're building.
Exactly.
And planting into soil and ensuring that there's a beautiful complementary relationship between the Institute and the department. And I love that. I love that.
So true. And, we have people who are very devoted to the Institute because they came through it. And so we're saying now, well, look, you have your department as well. And it's not something that's taking away from the Institute, but it's actually building upon the way Black studies exist at Columbia University. And it's a very dynamic place to be right now at this time.
Oh, I love it. And I would be remiss if we didn't just say his name again. Manning Marable. I know from a personal place what it means to lose someone early. I mean, if he had lived to be 150, it would have been too early to lose him as a force of nature. He taught in so many universities and blessed Columbia by being at our, in our university, in our space for so long. But, I remember, when I heard that he died in 2011, those of you who don't know, Manning Marable died in 2011. And I want to say, if my math is correct, that he was only about 60 years old. I mean, that is a baby when you think about how much more time he could have had. But when you look at his prolific work, we still get to be with him. I just want, before we move to the current, is there a memory of Manning that you have in your heart, something that you remember most about him?
Manning made us think we could do anything. And he would say, we're a small shop, but we can do big things, and you'd leave a meeting feeling like we were going to conquer the world. We were the most important kind of configuration of intellectuals working on African American and African diaspora studies in the world. So he actually could give you that sense and belief in possibility. We were the little engine that could, and we did.
Love that. I love that. And we'll bring him and all his work to the present. And as Kenyatta said, I have the blessing of serving on the Columbia University Board of Trustees, and I was in the room where it happened, as Lin-Manuel Miranda would say. And I remember the trustees in that very powerful and poignant moment when we voted the creation of the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. It was quite a moment, and I will say out loud that the African American trustees were quite emotional. I burst into tears. We understood the importance of the creation of the department, and we were so honored to be a part of it. So I wonder if you can just take us to the birth of the department and describe how it's been so far, and what kinds of students are flocking to the Mecca, if you will, and just give us some color and texture of what's happening with the department that is still a toddler if we were thinking about ages. Yeah.
No, I think that we had my colleagues and I had been meeting regularly, meeting in retreats and meetings, and trying to envision what our department would look like, dreaming it into being. And then the opportunity came for us to actually present a proposal. And you talk about learning how a university works. I mean, I really learned how our university works because everything is so considered at every single level. And so we were taking the proposal through committees, doing presentations, coming back, honing things, working. It made us all closer, but we knew we believed in what we were doing. And first there was the University Senate vote. After the Faculty of Arts and Sciences voted, then the University Senate voted, and that was unanimous, and we were just thrilled. But when the word got out that the trustees had voted, there was just celebration through Morningside Heights. Also with our community partners and colleagues and friends in the community of Harlem, who had been just supportive of us all the way through. So when we had our party acknowledging in Low Library that this had happened, I just felt like everyone who had supported us over the years came out, both within Columbia and also people from the Schomburg and Studio Museum and all of these different organizations just came to celebrate us. So you're right, we are growing. We are building on that vision. We have always had wonderful students because the Institute did have very good students, but with the kind of publicity that the department got, more curious students came our way. So our Intro to African American Studies is a gateway course. It's always lots of students, a very diverse body of students from throughout the university who come. And we have the best and the brightest. And this year we just finished graduation, and we were thrilled to graduate students who were inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, for instance, Bryn Evans and Zachary Kimmel, two of our majors who were inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, or students, Jarrell Daniels, one of our majors who has just become a Truman Scholar. So we really are getting students who represent not only the best of the department, but in representing the best of the department, represent the best of the university. And I think we'll go out in the world and continue to do magnificent work.
I love that. And I will just put a plug in there. There were 91 students inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. I was there because one of my children from the Hamlin School, Kyoko, was one of the inductees. So I was there watching all of those wonderful students. And I also am a big fan of general studies. Shout out to any alumni in our virtual community tonight who are students of general studies. That is one of, I would say, this university's most powerful and democratic, if you will, signs of inclusion. I love general studies so much. And Lisa, who's the dean, is just such a powerful leader and a graduate herself. And if you have not read Jarrell Daniels' story, you just have got to just Google him, look up Truman Scholars, such a prestigious honor for him. He has a powerful story of incarceration to freedom. You've just a plug. When you have some time tonight or tomorrow, get to know him. I'm so proud of our university and GS because he missed being a Columbia College student or an engineering student, but he had a pathway into our university and certainly to the department.
We're so grateful. Our students, come from the college and engineering, and lots of our students come from GS as well. And they just makes for a really thrilling experience in the classroom. So I agree. I'm here along with you to champion GS as well.
I love it. At this time, we're just going to pause and get some audience interaction, if you will, because as we've talked about the time before 1993, this kind of pre-institute period, and I love what you said, Farah, about the presence of people becoming a curriculum, if you will. My father, as a minister, would say that we are living epistles, that people are texts to be read, and the power of people to change the climate, culture, curriculum in a school. And of course, the Charles Hamiltons and those wonderful professors that came to Columbia very early on. And even white professors, frankly, like Eric Foner, who have championed African-American history. We are so grateful. I'm curious in our alumni community, how many people, we're gonna do a poll poll. And how many people, whether you graduated very recently or not, as you reflect on your undergraduate and your graduate studies, maybe you only went to one of Columbia's graduate schools or both like me, but how many of your courses, whether you had to take it or you elected to take it, how many of your courses focused on African-American and or African diaspora studies? We're just gonna see who's in the community tonight and see what we get. So we're just gonna wait a few minutes. I won't hum the Jeopardy song, but we're going to see what we have. I think, you know, it's interesting to think about what you choose in a community like Columbia, particularly in the undergraduate experience as a Columbia College graduate. You know, for the first 2 years, you're taking the courses that you're told to take. There's some, you know, freedom within the structure, but the core curriculum is I don't consider it a chokehold at all. I love the course so much. I mean, we're going to get to that next in talking about our coursework and what's in the core these days. But it's really interesting for me anyway to think about what people decided on their own to take in the absence of a department or with the Institute. How many people flocked to those places? I know I took a lot of African-American history and literature because I was an English major and I was also interested in those topics, obviously, as a Black person. So let's look at this. This is very interesting. To look at who's here tonight and to have 60% of our wonderful virtual audience. It doesn't look like everybody's voted yet, but you can continue to go and perhaps we'll do it. We'll you know, keep looking as we go. But 60% of those who answered did not have any courses in African-American or African diaspora studies. 1% or 2% of our group tonight did 6 or more. Now I would have clicked 3 to 5. Because I had about 5 classes. I took African-American history with Hollis Lynch and African-American poetry with Marcellus Blount and some other wonderful classes. But this is humbling, I guess is the word. I don't know, what adjective would you use to describe it? Does this surprise you in terms of?
It does not surprise me. It really does not. I think that number as we are living is changing. And I think that especially as we find our country going through different struggles, our students, the students who are attracted to Columbia are very curious students. And so they are coming in more numbers, you know, and they are coming with a sense, I think, of a high school background that's quite different than many of us came with. So they're coming even knowing that these courses exist. They're coming looking for the professors who they might have seen on television or something. So they're prepared in a way. I think that certainly most of my classmates were not prepared to be looking for courses in African American studies. So I think that that's probably you know, that's something that's changing, but it actually does not surprise me. And I was happy to see that 10% there who said they had taken, you know, courses in it, not in the department, but in the field.
Yes, I love Hussein. I'm going to give you a shout out. I love people, you know, right in the chat. As I said, we're interactive here tonight. And he talked again about the people as curriculum. So that as a graduate of the class of 96, and everyone else can see this chat, but I'm just going to acknowledge it and affirm Hussein as well. You know, sometimes the names are flipped. So I don't know if it's Rashid Hussein or Hussein Rashid. So you know, forgive me if I'm not saying your name in the right order. You can give me the chat and correct me because I think it's important to render people visible by saying their name the right way. But a lot of his exposure came through people. It was a people's curriculum for the people, by the people. That's mid-90s. All good. First name was Hussein. Great. I was right. Thank you, Hussein. Thank you for just, you know, being with us with your words. Randy Mixon says, I graduated in 1969. I want to believe my response to the poll would be different. Amen to growth, right? Columbia alumni are constantly growing and moving forward and not remaining static. And you can see, I don't know how many of you were listening closely to my bio, but I just graduated 2 weeks ago from Columbia again with another degree from Teachers College because I wanted to go back and finish a degree in organizational leadership. We're ever growing, ever changing. And yes, perhaps many of us, if we were to attend a university today, our courses might look a lot different. Amen to that. Thank you for the congratulations. And Shinwan says, you know, Jarrell Daniels, that is the way you spell his name is Jarrel, and it might be a double L, but I know it's the Jarrel, I think that's it.
Yeah, I
Am I
mean,
right there? We'll pull it up so you can Google and not search around the internet
it's
all night.
Jarrell.
Excellent, double R's and double L's. So let's go into the core curriculum and look at what's required. And we know that the core is a group of courses, it's a constellation of courses, there's a group of people who decide. And we can, if you go on the internet and look at Columbia College core curriculum, you can actually see the years and the text. And I started to giggle last night as I was just remembering some of the things that we read that are no longer read, that I thought, oh, that was so good. So we read the hymn to Demeter. Doesn't seem to be read anymore. We read Sappho. I'm not sure Sappho is still on. We read Madame de Lafayette, the Princess de Clèves. There's certain things that we read that are not, or that maybe the Aristophanes changed, or maybe changed which Aristotle we're reading. But what's changing over time, even in music and art hum, I saw that, if you take music hum these days, you're going to go to jazz and you're going to go to music of the civil rights era. They're going to be African-American artists in your art humanities slides. I remember those early mornings in the dark and loving my art humanities class. But we're going to focus on lit hum and the arc of texts that are chosen. And right now in the fall of lit hum, you have, the wonderful, powerful, Pulitzer Prize winning Susan Laurie Parks, whose play, I believe, Father Comes Home from the Wars, is in the fall. And then we have the incredible, the incomparable, iconic Toni Morrison and Song of Solomon in the spring. So tell us about what you think about that, Farah. Is that enough? Is one text by one African-American woman, is that doing something important? Yes, I think is the answer to that, but could we be doing more? Let's talk about that list and what you think about the presence of Black texts, if you will. I call them American texts by Black authors, but nevertheless, what do you think about those inclusions in the core?
Well, I think that the core, is also an introduction in some ways. And so, yes, I think it's very important that those writers are there. In CC, we have Du Bois who comes in. And I think that, it's elastic. It's even some of the, like, as you said, some of the ancient texts that used to be there aren't there anymore. And there's work and there's effort, because that's how canons are built, right? Canons aren't just natural. They're built and they're made and they respond to our contemporary moment as well. And so even before someone like Morrison was in the core, there was a freedom to teach what you wanted to teach at the very end. And many people chose Morrison because she just fit, she fit so well. It wasn't, and so it made sense that she would be the one. It makes sense that Duke Ellington would be someone you would learn about. And I'm hoping that students who encounter Duke Ellington in Music Hum, or Bearden in Art Hum, or Susan Laurie Parks or Toni Morrison in Lit Hum, that will then send them off to these other courses where they'll say, I want to learn about these people in a different context. And so it's so funny, Wanda, I've been at Columbia over 20 years now.
Whoa.
And many of my students who come to my Toni Morrison seminar will say, almost all of them will have been in Lit Hum, and they will have, if they've read any Morrison, it will be Song of Solomon. And they'll say, I read Song of Solomon in Lit Hum and I fell in love with it and I just wanted to read more of her. Now, students on their own are reading her all the time, but I think that that's what the core also does, is that it then feeds people out into the university. And I think that writers who are writing about race certainly have a place in the core, especially as we examine things like democracy and the relationship between race and democracy. And someone like Du Bois, who at the beginning of the 20th century tells us this is going to be an issue. So as we see Du Bois finally gaining his place as one of the kind of founding fathers of the discipline of sociology,
yes,
he needs to be in the core as well, and he is.
Absolutely. So it's the souls of Black folk in CC. Is that where he is? I believe so. That's amazing.
I think they might have even changed that at some point, but people like Morrison and Susan Laurie Parks, by all means.
Absolutely. There's a question. Thank you, Erwin. We'll get to more Q&A, but I just like interaction and as we go and let people feel seen. Are there classes, just back to the department for a moment, are there introductory courses is the question? Like if someone had no idea, if they hadn't come through Lit Hum yet, and they just were, sticking a toe in, or maybe they're not a college student at all, and they're in the graduate school of arts and science, or they met Professor Wilson, the wonderful Mabel Wilson, let's just call her out. I love her too. If you met Mabel in architecture and you're like, because you can't get out of her class without talking about the Black experience and the built environment. So let's say you pivot from architecture and you go, oh, maybe I'm gonna go over to this department. Are there introductory courses that just give you a flavor? Erwin asked maybe about the Harlem Renaissance, or picking up on Zora Neale Hurston, perhaps, who again, shout out, because it's a Columbia name. Zora Neale Hurston.
We have Introduction to African American Studies, African American, African Diaspora Studies, which is normally taught by my colleague, Yosef Soret. And that really is a kind of introduction to the field and introduction to the major texts and the major issues of the field. And at the same time, we also cross-list courses with our older, longer standing departments. So for instance, I always teach one of the sections of Introduction to African American Literature. I've teach the 19th century, I teach the 20th century. My colleague Robert O'Mealy teaches one. So those are courses that are set in the English department, but that are cross-listed. And then Intro to African American, African Diaspora Studies is in our department. So there are intro courses that you can take. You can take major debates in the field, for instance, that everyone is welcome to. I always have, not only do I have a diversity of students, I have a diversity of auditors who participate in Columbia's auditing program, some of whom follow and take several of my courses. And many of these are retirees, but they've taken, and I can hear them kind of talking in the beginning, like, oh, well, I took her so-and-so.
I love it.
We have a kind of very welcoming environment and atmosphere that welcomes people for coming.
Oh, I love that. So, at the end, you all are going to see some links to places to go and perhaps people to see at the end. And if there's a way that you want to be connected through the learning that's happening, gosh, to audit a course taught by Professor Griffin, boy, you'd be so lucky. I'm thinking about that Toni Morrison seminar myself. Boy, oh boy, you must. Is it all like just wonderful novels for a semester?
A whole semester. It's a whole semester starting with The Bluest Eye. And if there's time, we put in some nonfiction, in there as well. But yeah, we dive deep. We do a deep dive.
I don't see Kenyatta's face, but I know she is somewhere smiling. And we might conspire and crash. What do you Zoom bomb your course, Professor Griffin? You love it. Oh my goodness. Wonderful, wonderful. So let's talk about. I said I was just a fan of Toni Morrison. I think about Toni Morrison as obviously an iconic American author. She's writing for a very specific audience, as she will say herself if you've seen videos, but I have a video screen or a movie screen, particularly the Pieces I Am. Just have to put a shout out. There will be a link so you can see that documentary on Morrison if you haven't already. But you don't need video screens or movie screens, even though you are in the movie. The documentary features Professor Griffin quite prominently, and I was calling you out from the movie screen, while we were watching. Kenyatta and I went to see it. But you had a relationship with her, and wow, what an honor. You must pinch yourself sometimes too, with the places and people you have had the blessing and privilege of knowing. Can you bring Toni Morrison to life for us? I just would love to hear stories or memories. What was she like?
She was all those things that we know her to be. She was as brilliant as we think she was by reading. She was this literary genius. She was also just an incredibly down-to-earth person. What I miss most about her is her laugh. She had an incredible sense of humor, and she laughed deeply, deeply. She loved to laugh. She was very loyal to her friends. very caring about them, very protective of her privacy. And I think that we who are her friends are still protective of her privacy. But she was, just a good friend in that way. And I'll just tell a funny story that links to the core, because I would always say to her, I'm younger. She was someone I worshiped, before I even got to know her well. And so I was to say to her, like, I can never satisfy you. So when she was chosen, when Song of Solomon was chosen for the core, I called her and I said, Toni, guess what? Because, Columbia's core curriculum is famous, And I said, you are in the core. Song of Solomon is in the core. And I'm just like, wow. And she said, why not Beloved? Kidding me? Why not Beloved? I was like, it's Song of Solomon. And it works, like you have a quest, you reference the Odyssey. I mean, it works. Why not Beloved? She said.
Oh, I love it. She's like the text. You trying to sell her on the text to text connections and all of that. She's like,
Beloved. That's my best.
No, where is Seta? I love it. I love it. You must teach Beloved.
Yeah, I do. I do teach Beloved, and I teach all of them. I teach the lesser read ones as well. Love, Our Baby, all of them. There's never enough.
Wow. Shinwan Yoon says, why not both? I like that question, right? Why not both? Why not Beloved and Song of Solomon? I mean, there is a whole process I know by which, books enter and leave the core, and there are votes and committees. And, it is an open question as to, is there room for only one text? As our, I was an English major at Columbia, and love that. I was reading and writing papers the whole time. It was the best way to go through college for me. And I read a lot because I wanted to and had to. I mean, I had to take philosophy courses, history courses, all the related courses and my English courses, and I read a lot. So I read a lot of Morrison, but do you think there should be more? I mean, maybe that's a loaded question, but will there be room for other voices? Will we have two Morrisons? Would it be one text in the fall and the spring, or I don't know?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not on, I've taught in the core, but I'm not on, the committees that make the decisions, and I haven't taught consistently over time. I think it would be hard to have two texts by any one author in, say, a lit hum. So for instance, you might read Aristotle in lit hum, and then you might read Aristotle in CC as well. So you're reading the same author perhaps across different parts of the core. I think it's hard to justify having not two African-American authors. You can have more than that, but to have two books by the same author, I think would be a little more difficult. But that would be a question that I would defer to the people who make those decisions at the core.
Yeah. I want to give Mavis a shout out who says she graduated from, and again, I'm gendering names. Mavis, you can tell me if I'm using the right pronouns and if I've got it right, but I'll just use your name. Mavis graduated from engineering in 1983 and the law school in 1987, and gives you a shout out, I think, Farah, because Mavis was taking courses in African-American studies through the Institute for Research on African-American Studies, even before the pandemic. So yes, the Zoom sessions, interestingly enough, Zoom has created an alumni community that is broader in terms of access, because when you see something, you can tune in from whatever time zone, you can watch something asynchronously, whereas before it was happening in a room, in Skirmahorn or, in Low Library, and you just never got to see it. You can only hear about it. So there's a way that the pandemic has created access for the alumni community. And I'm glad. What's your sense? Do you think we're going to have more virtual things, even though we hope to come back in person in terms of instruction? I hope that more alumni, thank you, Mavis, will connect to what is offered from their homes, from their living rooms, and be able to read some of the texts that they, what they missed, really.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think that I don't know so much about the classes. Like you said, for instance, during the pandemic, I mean, I had students Zooming in from all over the world, and as well as my auditors. My auditors were from everywhere. And it also meant people who maybe, for accessibility reasons could not make it to campus, but they had access to my classes because of this. So I don't know if we'll be able to do it with the classes, but certainly I know, and this is true of the department, with our programming, we are going to have virtual options probably from now on, in addition to our in-person options, simply because we were able to reach people from all over the world. We had Columbia alums and people who weren't Columbia alums who came in from the continent of Africa for some of our events and from Asia for some of our events. We were able to bring, very kind of intimate dialogues between, say, for instance, an author like Ayanna Mathis and the jazz pianist Jason Moran, and people from all over the world could log in and be a part of that. And so because we so much want to touch as many people as we can, I do know that the virtual options will be there for our programming.
Great. You say Jason Moran, and I almost shed a tear. One of the many tickets that I had to rip up and throw away last spring, Farah, was Jason Moran. He was going to be playing music while Selma was being shown, the movie.
Yes, I remember.
I could cry. We missed it, but maybe he'll come back to the Bay Area. Jason, if you're listening, we love you and we miss you. I want to say, someone asked about whether or not the court, Adrienne, I know Adrienne, she's the mama of a wonderful Columbia College graduate, Tova, and asked if the core curriculum committee was a diverse one. I don't know off the top of my head who's on it, but maybe they'll be listening, and I'm sure, frankly, these conversations are alive and well. How could they not be these days? And they get to determine what's in the canon, if you will, of Lit Hum and CC and all of the courses. We'll come back to this question, but someone was asking about whether Frederick Douglass would find that voice. I'm sure the Frederick Douglass's voice is in some of the courses that you offer in the department, as well as, someone's also asking, and we'll come back to it, Armand, someone is asking about an exhibit on Toni Morrison in Nyack, and if you knew anything about that at the library there.
No.
So
No.
We'll have to figure it out. We'll dig in and figure it out. So let's keep moving. We have about 10 more minutes to talk. I could talk to you forever, Farah. And maybe we'll, I'm coming to New York eventually, and we'll sit and, just have tea or something. But I can't help but think about what's happening around us, not just within our wonderful university. Columbia has a full name, Columbia University in the city of New York. With great intention to have that full name. And we know that New York sits within the context of the neighborhood of Harlem, which sits within Manhattan, which sits within New York City, et cetera, et cetera. We can't separate ourselves from what's happening in the world. Yesterday was the 1-year anniversary, if you will. I don't know if we want to celebrate anniversaries, but we do know that yesterday was the day when George Floyd was killed. Publicly, we've got, you throw a stick at the newspaper, you're going to hit a story that intersects very clearly with African-American people, whether the pandemic and the disproportionate number of Black and brown people who have perished from the earth and whose jobs were impacted. You and I care deeply about women and children and education and the impact on Black and brown students across our nation, whether we're thinking about healthcare disparities or infant mortality. I mean, you look the national conversation right now, if we can call it a conversation, or yelling match about critical race theory. When you think about all this stuff, it's like a tornado around us within which higher education sits. How do you connect what's happening in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies to the world? What are those connective tissues, if you will, that allow people to talk about what's happening in the world, and how does that impact what you're teaching?
Well, I mean, I think that we consider ourselves like an engaged intellectual community. I say to my students, even before some of the crises that we've experienced, I say, I can almost guarantee you, and it's not with pride, I wish this weren't the case, that something we're reading about that happened in the past will resonate. Something will happen during the course of our time together, that something you've read about in one of these texts gives you a basis for understanding, a way of thinking critically. So even when I hear all of this stuff about critical race theory, our colleague Kimberly Crenshaw across the street at the law school is one of the founders of the kind of critical race theory. So, I mean, I would say to my students, at least know what you're talking about. Take a course.
Amen.
As a throwaway phrase, like you have one of the pioneers here who invented the word intersectionality. Take a course. My colleague Stephen Gregory can talk about the city and the relationship of the university to the city. My colleague Sam Roberts, can talk about public health issues and issues of addiction. I mean, I think there's always something that we're studying that gives an important historical depth and context and gives us a way of thinking critically about the situations that we find ourselves in. I would say to our audience tonight, for instance, one of the things that we did when the health disparities of COVID became clear is we thought, okay, how do we do what we do and address this? And we immediately, my colleagues Mabel Wilson and Sam Roberts, created a podcast, which you can access from our website, called Black Lives in the Age of COVID. And each one was devoted, they talked to someone who was a subway conductor. Do you know how many subway conductors or people who worked for the MTA got sick, how many lost their lives? He was on the front line. They talked to public health workers. They talked to, it was just such a dynamic, in the moment response of our department to what we saw and what we knew that our community was going through. And so I think that the department offers a context for us together as a community to discuss hard issues, and gives us a vocabulary for talking about them and a framework for thinking about them together.
I love that, Farah. One of the things that I love about the Columbia University Board of Trustees is that we are not burying our heads, whether on a Zoom screen or when we're in person in Low Library. We have been taught by the incredible professors, Courtney Cogburn and others at the School of Social Work, and we're doing a mini version of her Anti-Black Racism Institute. Part 2 is June 10th for the Board of Trustees. And, I'm reminded when I asked you that question, I thought, I loved the moment when Joseph from your department came and talked to us about this concept that I hadn't ever heard of put together, but he called it inclusive public safety, I think is the concept, and talked about policing and talked about some of the research around Columbia and security and what should a Columbia security person look like? Should they look like a cop, given what we know about the traumatic experiences of African-American people with the police? I was like, yeah, inclusive public. I never put it together like that. It's something you think about, but when a scholar uses their work to solve some of our greatest challenges, it just feels purposeful and powerful, and that we're not interested in just simply sitting around, wooden tables and, shaking our heads and nodding at problems, but really saying, so how do we take what we know to really change what's around us? I love that. I'm pretty sure that was the phrase, inclusive public safety. I love that.
That's one of the things that I love about being at Columbia, that, I've been through the Ivies. But I do love that, at least, a kind of commitment to want to know and to want to engage, and to grow and just to have the most amazing faculty, my colleagues, not only in the department, but throughout the university. If there's a question I have, I can probably find someone somewhere at Columbia who can help me figure it out. And that's wonderful.
I love that. We don't have to be, an ivory tower without windows and, without permeable boundaries. I'm excited about the expansion of Manhattanville and just watching some of these beautiful buildings come to life as the business school. Some of you who are on this call tonight are probably Columbia Business School alumni, and there's so much that's going on, but it's not happening outside of the community. It's happening with the community and the spaces that have been designed. I'm excited about that. Maybe we'll have to have Mabel come talk to us more about that, because I know that's her area of expertise. I'm not going to step on any of her toes because they are precious. But as we come to the end of this kind of conversation, Farah, I'm just curious, there are alumni on the call tonight. There will be people who will watch this recording asynchronously. Thank you for that. I'm curious about what this alumni community can do to support the work of the newly developed, African American and African Diaspora Studies Department, what we can do to connect to the Institute for Research in African American Studies. We don't need to, as we were saying earlier in our conversation, we don't need to say, oh, well, I missed it. We can come back to our learning spaces and we can come back to our scholarly brains. I can attest to that. I did really well. I just got my transcript the other day and I thought, wow, I really finished well in my 50s as I am now as a student at Teachers College. But we want to be supportive. I think I can speak on all of our behalf. We wouldn't be here tonight if we weren't interested, right? We wouldn't be listening right now if we weren't interested. So are there, 2 or 3 things we can do to make sure that the Institute and the department grow and that the programs are celebrated? Put us to work. What can the alumni community do to support and connect to the work that you're doing?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. We do have, I'd like to highlight the work of a group of alums from the class of 68 to 72 who came to me and wanted to set up something, for instance, in honor of one of their classmates, Zachary Husser, who passed away. And they came together and we brainstormed, and they just endowed a prize named for him. And the prize, they wanted it to be for student activists because that's what he had been. And it has been the most beautiful, organic project that fit perfectly with our department because, of course, we should have a prize honoring student activists, right? And so we have that prize and we're going to be doing the first ceremony, giving it out in the fall. So I would say follow the department, follow us on social media, attend our events, both virtually and in person. Think about ways that you would like to engage. There are giving opportunities at our website where you can give to things that are already there, but also feel free to come to us with ideas about what you'd like to see, because so many of you actually had the vision for this department before we came into being. That famous line, if you build it, they will come.
Yes, from Field of Dreams, yeah.
Many of you dreamt it. And so I want you to feel invested in it and invested in, well, I'd like to see I'd like to see these kinds of courses, or I'd like to support this kind of research. All of that is welcome. So please do stay in touch with us. Please stay in touch with us.
Awesome. We're going to bring Kenyatta Monroe-Sinkler back in a moment, but I want to say to the alumni community that you don't have to leave your story in the past. Your story of Columbia and what it was like and your struggles and your triumphs, we would be silly to think that every alum had 4 years or 6 years or 3 years or 2 years at Columbia and everything was perfect. Maybe there was someone that you didn't get along with, or maybe there was a course you wish you had, or maybe it was hard to construct your major because it didn't exist and you had to create it. And maybe you had 4 or more, exuberant years. But to the extent that people would go back again and do their courses again or bring it forward, being connected to the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies and the Institute gives you a way to continue your narrative. Might I even say to correct it? Because sometimes people think, well, it wasn't that, and I'm not going to give, and I'm not going to be involved because it wasn't, all I wanted it to be. Like, you can tell I'm from Brooklyn because my head is starting to do that, But, sometimes people, you kind of argue with your past, right? And you lament what could have been. And I'm a big fan of saying, you know what? Well, if it wasn't the way I wanted it, how might I carry forth my own story and keep going and make sure that the chapters in my life's novel continue? So if you are one of the people who said, I've never had an African American Studies course at Columbia, guess what? You're still at Columbia. Keep it going and take a course or be an auditor. I just think there's an opportunity for us to integrate the Columbia of today into the Columbia we know as an alumni community. And I think that's really powerful. That gives us a sense of agency as alumni, as opposed to saying, oh, well, I throw up my hands because it wasn't what I needed it to be. It can be something different in the present and future. And I think the department and the Institute give us ways to keep our story going. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I certainly think that those alums, for instance, who endowed that prize in the name of Zachary Husser, without question, they fit that narrative. Like, things were not always perfect, and here was a chance for them to come and do something. They had demanded a department as student activists themselves. And so I do think it's an opportunity to make it the place you want it to be, or that you wish that it had been.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. With that, I am going to bring Kenyatta Monroe Sinkler, class of 91 from Columbia College, and one of the 3 chairs of the reunion committee for her class, which is awesome. Back for moderating the Q&A. Thanks, Kenyatta.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back. And I was so wrapped in the conversation. It was so wonderful. It could go on forever, but we're going to ask some questions. Moselle Thompson, CC 76, Law 81, asks, the core has evolved, albeit slowly. Do you think enough? Black, Asian, and Latino writers, ? Also, do you think that Columbia does enough to tell the world about the core's evolution? And then they write, I recently watched a YouTube video of a high school student who called the core, quote unquote, white guy curriculum.
Interesting. I know Moselle. Hi, Moselle. He and I serve on a Columbia Alumni Association task force for belonging, which is something that we care deeply about, is making sure everyone feels connected. Farah, do you want to take that? What do you think? We touched on it a bit, but you want to say more about Asian voices, Latinx voices?
They should all be there, right? What we have learned is that the core is an institution that can evolve, and that does evolve, and I've been thinking about the core a lot lately, because I think about its origins coming out of World War I, and how invested the core was in making sure that Columbia students understood democracy, right? And why we fight for democracy. And thinking about how we find ourselves again today in a position where we really should think about, do we value democracy? And what are the texts that help us do that? And is it possible, because we are, as a nation, not only trying to be a democratic experience, but being a multiracial democracy, probably the only one in the history of the world. And to what extent will our core curriculum reflect that? So I think that these are conversations that are ongoing, and that the kinds of questions that have to be brought to bear on the core, even from those of us who greatly, greatly value what the core offers. It's an elastic institution, and it can withstand these kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm. And I also think some of the central questions, this is one of the things as an English major and as a former English teacher, I think that there are books by white guys that can be taught in such a way where you bring forth the issues of our day. So when I was an English teacher many years ago at the Chapin School, my first 3 texts for my class, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, Great Expectations. My contention is that you actually can't teach Dickens or Bronte without talking about class, right? Isn't that that's what Pip is doing the whole time? If you teach Jane Eyre and you don't talk about Rochester and the first wife, Bertha Mason, who's a Jamaican woman up in the attic and burns the whole place down, then you're not really teaching the book. So I would also say, I would love to know, and I'm sure this is happening, that when you talk about Plato and you talk about, the cave, and you think about all those things we read, whether in CC or in Lit Hum, I would hope that even if a white male is an author, that the way you bring forth the themes, how does, I love, did you see Antigone? There was a whole adaptation around Antigone and Ferguson, and use that story to connect to, it's the same story, truly, right? Someone's dead in the street, and what do you do? So there are ways to teach some of these ancient texts, in my opinion, Moselle, that bring forth, that connect. We don't have to wait till we get to Song of Solomon or to Susan Laurie Parks to decide that it's now time to talk about the Black experience. I think we need to be talking about it the whole way through. That's what I hope is happening.
The text that you talked about when you're talking about Jane Eyre and Bronte, like, what does it mean to be able to bring the insights that our colleagues in post-colonial studies brought forth, so that we can't talk about these texts without talking about empire, right? So I think, and I happen to like some of the old white guys too. And I read Morrison differently because I read them, and she read them too, and was in conversation with them.
Yeah. And Carl Hovde, I remember he was one of my American Lit professors. He had us read Faulkner alongside Morrison,
right?
Thinking about Southern writers. Yeah. Thank you for that question, Moselle.
Okay, next question. Leonard Adams, college class of 1961, asks, way back when I was in the Corps, there was a thread from text to text in Lit Hum and CC. How would you place, say, Morrison and or Parks in the flow of the other materials from other cultures? What other authors from other traditions would fit?
Morrison, I think if you read her and you've read these other texts, you see them in her. She wrote her thesis on Faulkner. She was a classics minor at Howard. And one of the reasons why Song of Solomon is the one and not Beloved, even though she wanted Beloved, is, Song of Solomon is on an odyssey. I mean, Milkman is on an odyssey, but she has a critique of the odyssey that's about war and theft of land and people. One of the sort of magical characters in Song of Solomon is named Circe, in a ruin, right? So she is constantly in dialogue with those texts. In almost every text, she has meditations on justice, which reads well with Aeschylus. Or if you read A Mercy by Morrison, you see Ovid. So one does not have to force these writers in. Ellison could be in the Corps for the same reasons, because Invisible, he's engaging all of those texts. He's engaging, it's very Homeric, but it's also engaging modernists like Joyce. And Susan Laurie Parks, that play, is a sort of dialogue, conversation, adaptation of, the early classic Greek text. And so I would say that all one needs to do is to bring the knowledge that one has from these ancient texts to your reading of the more contemporary texts by these very well-read, literate Black women, and the connection is obvious.
There's nothing to be said from what you just said. You saw me snapping my fingers like I was in church or something. I just waved my hands, Farah, just like amazing. What an amazing answer. Not that I'm surprised, but I love that.
Are we ready for the next question? Anna Sapir, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, college class of 96. Professor Griffin, I remember as a sophomore asking my contemporary Civ professor why there was not much of a focus on feminist philosophy in our course, to which he responded by assigning the class a few pamphlets written by Dworkin and McKinnon. Shrug emoji. Can you speak to your commitment to teaching your students about Black feminists?
I am a Black feminist. So yeah, my students, I should say again that I haven't taught in the Corps in some time, but you can't really get out of my classes without studying Black feminism, or any of my, my male colleagues, my female colleagues. Black feminism sits at the center of Black studies, and has transformed our understanding of Black studies. So, our students are engaging texts by Black feminists and engaging Black feminist frameworks and critical thinking in just about everything we do. So yes, the commitment is definitely there, and I can speak not just for myself, but for my colleagues as well.
Just a follow-up question, since I know we have alum, I think we have somebody even from class of 59 on the Zoom. Who are some of the foundational Black feminists that people could pick up and read?
Well, Hortense Spillers, Kimberly Crenshaw, who's at Columbia's Saidia Hartman. You know, people can start with bell hooks, if that's a good starting point to read. So there are a number of people, but I think any one of those scholars would be a good starting point. There's also, you know, depending on what your field, if you're interested in kind of more theoretical writings, or if you're interested in, say, historical writings, there's a whole field of Black women's history that has just exploded. And really, you know, helped shape Sarah Haley, who, knock on wood, we hope is coming to Columbia soon, is an extraordinary historian of Black women. Erica Dunbar, who has a book out about Una Judge, who was she was the enslaved woman who ran away from George Washington, and he spent his life trying to get her back, and he never did. It's called Never Caught. So these are all names of people who I would definitely recommend that people take a look at.
Thank you so much. The next question is from Jacqueline Snyder Calusi, college class of 96. I would be curious to hear how the African American Studies curriculum touches on the history of what one nowadays might call allies. My question is inspired in particular by the Philip Guston retrospective scheduled to open at the U.S. National Gallery of Art in 2022, and recent discussions over interpretations of Guston's work.
I would say, you know, in all honesty, I don't know that our curriculum touches on those kinds of things. You know, those are issues that are important, and that certainly, especially like the exhibitions, that one might find those discussions in art history. Kelly Jones, the art historian, MacArthur winner art historian, who is going to be the next chair of African American Studies, is an art historian, but much of our curriculum focuses on works by and about people of African descent, and less on their you know, the ways that Black peoples are portrayed in the works of art by other peoples. And while and in terms of political allies, we certainly talk about people who have been allies to our struggle. And, you know, you can't take a course in history without, you know, taking understanding the value of people, white people, but also Asian people, people of all races who have donated themselves, their commitment, their talent to Black struggle. But I would say that the focus of our courses tends to be the history and the cultural products of people of African descent.
Thank you. I have an anonymous question. What took so long to establish the department when other peer institutions created their departments decades ahead of Columbia?
It's a very good question. And there are many things at play, but certainly by 93, what you get is you get several waves. So you get 68, 69, you get some schools creating departments. So Harvard creates its department around 68 or 69. And that's the first wave of departments. And then the kind of second wave of departments is in the early 90s. So you get places that had programs or centers that then departmentalized in the early 90s. And that happened at a place like Yale, which had a dynamic program, but it became, and I'm talking here about our peer institutions, it became a department, or later at the University of Pennsylvania, for instance, or places where they revitalized departments that had not been well resourced in the 90s. At Columbia, what happened in 90, when that wave of departments was founded, what happened was the founding of the Institute for Research in African American Studies, which basically functioned as a department with the exception it could not hire and tenure its own faculty. The reason why African American Studies was housed in an institute at Columbia is because of the ways that disciplines were organized here. So disciplines were organized in departments. Interdisciplinary work was organized in institutes and centers. So you had gender studies, the Center for Study of Ethnicity and Race. These were centers and institutes, whereas conventional disciplines like English, history, philosophy were located in departments. We, by the time we came along as a department, we're interdisciplinary. We could not be housed as, the Department of African American History. We are an interdisciplinary department, and I think that it was a moment when the university was willing to move outside of the ways of organizing thought that it had been doing for a century, right? To actually create an interdisciplinary department, whereas before interdisciplinary studies had been housed in places like institutes. So that's a long answer to that question, but I hope it satisfies.
Yeah.
But that's an important one, yeah.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Wanda?
No, I was just going to say that that's an important distinction, because one could read from that narrative, without Farah's narrative, you could read a lack of commitment, a lack of desire. But then that would go back to where we started, which that would be to erase the Manning Marables and the work that he and others centered in the university. And I would be curious, Farah, if you think that the department, I was going to say, I would be curious to know if you think a department is quote unquote better, but we already answered that question, which is like it enhances and develops and does things alongside an institute. So we don't have to have an either or.
Right. I think that what the department does is that it does give autonomy. And the autonomy is in our ability to hire and tenure people in our field. Whereas without that, we're relying upon other departments, and many of them have been very good partners with us: history, anthropology, English, extraordinary partners. But we have to rely on those partnerships, and that's no longer the case. We don't have to rely on partnerships. We can make those decisions ourselves about who is the best in our field, and it's recognized globally as a field of intellectual study, right? A field of study, a field that produces knowledge.
I love that. That's great.
The next question we have is from Jorge Serrano, college class of 90. The historian Erica Dunbar earned her PhD from Columbia in history. What about mixed people, or rather Afro-Latinidad people or Europeans? I guess they're asking about the inclusion of about the diaspora part of the.
So we have scholars who work on Afro-Latinidad in the department. Our colleague Frank Garidi, who's written on Cuba. We also have a search going on for someone who works on Afro-Latinx studies. That's, in addition to, we also have a search, a number of searches going on, and that's one of the areas that we want to build in. We have colleagues who, my colleague Stephen Gregory has written about Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly the Dominican Republic. So it's an area of study that we cover and that we are building on. We don't have anyone who does mixed race studies, but certainly in terms of the Afro-Latinidad, we have it, and we are building. It's an area that we want to build. We think we can become even stronger.
I love it. One of the things that a department can have in terms of sustainability, and I say this with I'm the chair of the Alumni Relations and Development Committee on the university board. One of the things that we can do as alumni is to support named professorships. part of what attracts great people to universities. I mean, if you remember back to Kenyatta's introduction of, Farah, she has a named chair in the English department that comes from, people who are, supporting that. I want to say, if I'm not wrong, someone, I cannot remember now who it was, but George Rupp might be one of the, is that Mabel's, is she under, there's someone who's connected to his name, he and his wife's name underwrite another professorship. I think it might be Mabel Wilson.
We do, and we also have 2 chairs that are in the department, the new Kenneth Ford chair, trustees helped bring to us. And my colleague Stephen Gregory is holding that chair now. And we also have a Moran Weston chair who's another Columbia alum. And my colleague, the philosopher, Robert Gooding Williams, holds that chair. But yes, chairs endowed in the department. Someone could endow a chair in Afro-Latinidad or in Black feminist studies. I'd love that.
Great. That'd be great. And that gives a department deep roots.
Yes.
To be able to have multiple people to hold a named chair. Just one of the many things that I think I'm looking forward to seeing more.
I am sad to say that we are at our last question of the evening. How do you think Toni Morrison would react and or reflect on Blackness and anti-Blackness in this historical moment of COVID, post-Trump, the Derek Chauvin conviction, etc.?
Well, I certainly miss her voice and her analysis in moments like this, but we are blessed because we have access to her writing. And I would say that if one wants to know the answer to that question, I would go to the collection of essays that came out the year she died, The Source of Self-Regard. I read that sometimes and I feel like she was prophetic. She was so prescient. And I'll say, when did she write this? She was warning about threats to democracy. She was warning about what it means to other people. That she says in one essay called Peril, she says, before there is a final solution, there are first steps, second steps, third steps. And some of those steps that she gives us, I'm frightened because I recognize them. I said, that's what she was talking about. So I think that when we have had a genius of her caliber in our midst, we are fortunate because she left a body of work that we don't have to say so much, what would she think? We can sort of garner it in terms of what she has thought, and it can inform our own thinking and our own action. That's the way I treat her work.
Take a breath with that, right? Wow, here we are at the end. I'm going to call out, so don't go just yet, but I'm going to call out someone in the chat here who is from the class of 1996, Liz Pousset, because she has done something that I hope all of you will do as we think about a way to close our time together. And as I would say, usher in a spirit of joy and gratitude. And if you scroll through this wonderful chat, Liz at some point, well, we know what point, at 4:57, had a remembrance. She was thanking Professor Griffin and me for this conversation, which of course we are so grateful, but she then connected the conversation to her own Columbia experience and called out Professor Ann Wallace and just reread Native Son. So I am going to sing a song that goes back to this title, A Change is Gonna Come, or A Long Time Coming, which is the title of this alumni talk. And as I sing the song, it's not meant for entertainment, although I hope you will be blessed by the song. But what I hope is that we can create a cascade of gratitude and remembrance for the ways in which either now or in our pasts, we think about African-American and African Diaspora Studies. Maybe you just want to say thank you for tonight, but if there's someone like an Ann Wallace or others, if I could chat with my fingers and sing at the same time, I would put in for myself, Marcellus Blount and Hollis Lynch, and those are, maybe you will too, and there'll be many others. But I would like for us as a collective alumni community to create a way of gratitude is to end our incredible 90 minutes together. It just makes me happy to put all these words in the air, and I'm so grateful for everyone who has joined us tonight. So with that, here is Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come. I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change's gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. I go to the movies and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me, don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change's gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, sister, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, there have been times when I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I am able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Thank you.
So beautiful, so beautiful. Thank you.
So thank you for an evening learning about the rich, deep font well of Black studies that we have at Columbia and how you as an alumni can access this community, this work from your home. And on behalf of the college community, I want to express my deepest thanks to Wanda, Holland Greene, Professor Farah Jasmine Griffin for your evening, and to our important audience, the Columbia alumni, for joining us. We encourage you to stay involved and engaged with the college community and to attend the many enriching events during these 2 weeks of virtual reunion programming. For more information on the African American and African Diaspora Studies Department, visit afamstudies.columbia.edu and follow the social media pages. And there will be a slide at the end with these tags. We encourage you to stay involved and engage with the college. And thank you and have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.